Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to do something interesting today in that I don't know if this is one or three videos yet. We're going to be looking at a style of music called plunderphonics, and the person has requested three separate tracks. And they told me I could either do it in one video or three separate videos, and because I don't know how much I actually have to speak about the analysis of each individual track rather than maybe just the style of creation as a whole, I don't know where I'm going with this yet. So, you've probably seen the title of the video, you've probably seen the length of the video as well. You know, future you in the future know if this is one or three. I don't know yet. This is all really interesting to me. I want to start this off real quick with a little bit of research, though. The style we're getting into is called plunderphonics. It's a music genre in which tracks are constructed by sampling recognizable musical works. The term was coined by John Oswald in '85 in his essay Plunderphonics, or Audio Piracy as a Compositional Prerogative. That right there, the title of that essay, it already has my mind going. This is going to be really interesting stuff. It says, although the concept of plunderphonics is seemingly broad, in practice there are many common themes used in plunderphonics music. Heavy sampling of educational films of the 50s, news reports, radio shows, or anything with trained vocal announcers. Now, I think that this is based off of the definition of plunderphonics from the 80s. I'm curious if the plunderphonics we're going to check out today, which is from 07, 2015, and 2018, still follow along with that idea. I don't think they do, because one of them is literally called Zelda Breath of the Wild Remix. I don't think that follows along with news reports, radio shows, vocal announcers, or educational films of the 50s. But it's going to be interesting seeing where this takes us. But I think the general idea of sampling other ideas and creating a new work out of them is going to be really interesting. I know that we've heard this before we checked out something up like it on a live stream a few months ago. I think that's either the song or the name of the group had books, and maybe it was The Books. I don't remember. But it was a really interesting thing that at the time I really didn't have much to talk about. It's an interesting way to craft music that kind of it utilizes the musical tools that I'm accustomed to, but in ways that I'm not used to speaking about them. And I found it difficult to enunciate my thoughts and articulate my thoughts in a way that really had anything to add to what was being heard rather than just regurgitating what I heard. So with that, we're going to start off today with the first song. These three tracks come from Stereo Reservoir. It says this one is Alice by the artist Pogo, or sometimes Nick Bertke. Really paved the way for the style, the type of music he largely helped pioneer, called plunderphonics, which is interesting. I don't know if Stereo Reservoir is talking about the specific branch of plunderphonics, which, like I said, seems to be very different than what John Oswald originally categorized in his '85 essay. But this was 2007, which was, what was it, 20 years later? And I wonder if this maybe is just a new branch that was pioneered here by this Pogo or Nick Bertke character, more so than what John Oswald was coining and speaking about in the 80s. So yeah, let's dive into this. We got a little over 2 minutes, little under 3 minutes, I suppose. Here, the track is called Alice.
There
how that one tone that we started with that was repeated over and over, the the sweet element of it is slowly disappearing. All we're getting is that core note now as more layers are being added up. I love the little bit of like call and response, real quick pocketing almost there that we're getting. Hmm. Okay. Um, where do I even begin with this? If I were to speak about this directly about the music itself, and I didn't know about the what plunderphonics was, and I had to speak about just what I heard in a vacuum of what I heard, I would be a little underwhelmed here. We have pretty much a linear layering concept where we start with that we take that idea and we slowly build on it. We add the little, sounds to me like a cymbal, but I mean, it would have to be some other sound in the film, I believe. We add that, and then we add another line, and then another concept, and then we add her vocals on top of that. And there's what, two vocal ideas here that just get repeated a lot. And there's one of them gets chopped up a little bit to kind of get used in like a remixy way where she'll say a couple syllables and then go back like two syllables to repeat those again and kind of get a little bit of that remix kind of thing going on. Um, and that's the whole song. We go up in rising complexity as far as layers go, and we come back down until we end back where we started. Um, And in that, I don't think that there's a lot that in this track is interesting. It is uh, pretty much what I would put into the realm of pop music, where it's all very palatable. We'll get into that. Okay, we're gonna stay with this. It's all very palatable. Um, the note choices, the melodies, the chord progressions, everything here is designed to be very listenable. There's nothing here that I find to be exceptionally abrasive, and the repetition is a strong aspect of pop music as they try to get the song stuck in your head. It really is the idea of the conception of this track that I think is what sparks the imagination. And I've talked about in the past a strong admiration for electronic artists who make their own sounds because, unlike me, who tends to utilize what is presented in front of me, if I want something powerful and majestic, I go and grab, a trumpet and I write a part for that. I have voices that are assigned to me that I can utilize. And an electronic artist says, what do I want to play this sound in my head? I don't know. Let's go make it. And there is something very powerful and yet very scary about the open-endedness of that process, in that you can use an infinite amount of things in your chain to really hone in on a very specific tone. And it's a bit daunting for me to even think about going that angle rather than utilizing what's presented to me. But there's a real big craft in that. And I've always been in awe of, that angle of music creation. And this sort of sits in the middle. There is a creative element to this. Some of these sounds I don't think were even instruments to begin with. I kind of think that that hi-hat sound or the cymbal sound they were utilizing through here is actually glasses tinking together, probably somewhere along the lines of maybe the spears that the cardmen use, or maybe the teacups at the at whatever, I can't think of it, Mad Hatter's birthday party. That sound though is not a musical sound; it's a sound effect. I'd wager. I'm not 100% sure there, but that's kind of where my mind is going on that. Um, and it didn't necessarily need to be that one. Maybe it could have been anything else. It's just a rhythmic clacking on the downbeat. It doesn't necessarily need to be that sound specifically. We just need something to represent the beat. Um, Everything aside from the vocals could be any sound in the track. Even that opening, that little slide into that note that we have at that beginning, I think comes from when she's tumbling down, and we have that kind of sound coming from a lot of the woodwinds, if I'm remembering that song correctly. And so we haven't even taken that whole run. It feels like they took one piece of the run and then modulated it digitally to get the specific tone and slide into that they wanted. So there is both an element of, yes, certainly these sounds all came from the movie. There is no place in here that a sound was handcrafted from scratch. So there is this element of I only have a limited workspace to work with. But think about how many sound effects are in a song. Think about or a movie. Think about how many songs are in there, and that you can take a 1 second snippet or even half of a second snippet from any piece of these songs to be utilized. Any voice line. There is so much auditory information in a film that can all be converted to music. So there, even though it is finite, it is still kind of infinite, especially when you realize that anything can be modulated through effects. This is very daunting because, in the same way of crafting a sound from scratch, trying to find what you want something to sound like when it doesn't already necessarily exist that way, the same thing is happening here. They're still crafting their sounds. It's just instead of utilizing sine waves or saw waves as their basis to modulate upon, here they're using any millions of sounds in a work to do so. It is kind of bonkers to think about because, unlike with traditional music or sound creation with electronic music, you really have three places to start, the three different types of waves on your synthesizer, and then you modulate from there, and all your options come from how you're going to do that. But here, the starting point is just as large as the modification section. The other thing is though, is that with those three waves, you know what those three waves are. And of course, we can take plunderphonics and put it into electronic music as well and kind of mix the two. But for this conversation right here, I want to have a very harsh divide between the two. Um, but when it comes to plunderphonics, not only do you have a large array of sounds that you can start with, you have to find them. They're not given to you. With a synthesizer, you're given those three waves. This is what you can work with. Here, nothing is so eloquently laid out. You have to listen through the film and say, oh, that would be neat to utilize. Or, oh, I can hear that in a different way. What if I did this to it and then did this to it, and then I'd have that sound I want. but you still have to go out there and find that sound. It is, to me, maybe even more daunting. Maybe daunting in a similar amount, but in a different way. I don't know. The whole thing of making your own sounds is so beyond what I'm used to in my composition style. But yeah, I want to make sure here that I emphasize the complexity and difficulty in here and compare it to starting from scratch with sound creation, because I do think that even though this one gives you all the sounds to start with, it's still in that same realm of complexity, of intricacy, um, as creating something from scratch. It's kind of bonkers. Um, and I don't know where else I could take this though. I think we are just going to run all three of these tracks together, because that is really all the analysis I can give, is that the process is really intriguing, but the music itself ends up being kind of mundane. And, for better or worse, I think this works well as an electro pop track. There's nothing too abrasive in it. You just kind of get in that groove and enjoy it. I do want to talk real quick though, and I wonder if this is going to be addressed in any future tracks. Both the other tracks are from the same artist, so I don't know where this Pogo person kind of took this craft. Being that this is one of the originals, as Stereo Reservoir had stated, somebody who is really innovating on the plunderphonics concept, there's going to be some hiccups, right? As I've always talked in the past, we have innovators and we have iterators. And the innovators typically create very flawed music in a new direction. They don't have the roadmap yet. There's going to be mistakes. Iterators are going to take what the innovators have found and execute it with even more and more precision, really narrowing down and perfecting that style. And I think this is going to fall in that innovative area where this Pogo created or helped create a new branch or pushed plunderphonics into more eyes, ears, whatever. Pogo is sounds like they're a pretty big person in the plunderphonic style. But because they were so close to the inception of it, there's going to be some aspects that don't work as well. And that's where this topic comes in, which is the vocals. I really want to like what the vocals are doing, but they're so choppy. And I think that there's some pitch modification on them as well, which sometimes just doesn't quite work the way that I would like it to. It makes the the melody just a bit too odd. There's an oddity to it all that I don't think quite works well, at least to my ears. And that's not to say it's bad. I I'm just a real big fan of melodic flow, and this kind of lacks that. I can hear what the melody is aiming for, but because of the medium, it's hard to achieve that. But I'm also comparing this to something I didn't know I knew, which is modern day plunderphonics. This is no different than the Hydro Kids song that they made off of um, the news interview with that dude. Um, I don't remember what channel it was. There's these two guys, younger, 16, 17-year-old kids, I think, if I remember right. And they took this news interview and, chopped up the vocals and modified the pitch and rhythmically tuned it and then put a beat behind it. And yeah, as far as I see it, that's plunderphonics. The beat was not completely stripped from any other resource as far as I can tell, so maybe it's a different branch of plunderphonics. Maybe they want to call it a different thing. Maybe purists will classify it as a different type of music, but it's the same concept, especially since plunderphonics, as described by Oswald in '85, typically utilized radio casts, and this was modern day news. I think it actually kind of fits well within that range, but the music itself, at least from what I remember of that song, didn't come specifically from the media source. It was entirely crafted after the fact. But yeah, And, thinking about the way that the melody and vocals are handled in stuff like that and everything that it um, inspired, because after that, I mean, at least for me, that was the point that I was aware of this style of music. Um, and after that, it just kind of exploded. I started to see it everywhere. For a while, what was that, the late 2000s, early 2010s, if I remember right? I might be missing that date. Um, but I'm kind of comparing this to that, but I got to remember this is so much earlier, right? Again, innovation versus iteration. I'm curious to see where these later ones from Little Tommy J fit in, and possibly how this style has been refined. And it's also entirely possible that Pogo wanted that sort of choppy vocal work there as well. Because it does lend itself to be wholly separate from more traditionally crafted musical works, especially with your vocals coming out of a vocalist trying to smooth everything over. But I don't know. So those are my thoughts on Pogo's Alice. Here we're going to move on then, because I do think we can pull all this into one video. It's probably going to be a bit lengthy, but yeah, let's pull this all into one video. We're going to go back to our comment and flip this guy over to Stereo Reservoir's second one. This one's from Little Tommy J. Open Your Eyes. It's a piece of music created only using sounds ripped from the video game Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So we're going to dive into this and see what's going on. This one is just under 4 minutes long, and this is also the latest track in this trilogy here, loosely connected trilogy, 3 randomly selected songs. Although not randomly selected. I'm sure Stereo Reservoir has a purpose for this order, but I don't think that there's any in-context reason for the 3 of these to be put together, other than that Stereo Reservoir is trying to tell a progression of sorts, possibly. Anyways, this is the latest. So this October 2018. The next one we're going to look at is from 2015. So yeah, so this is Little Tommy J's Open Your Eyes. It's a little loud. Might have to turn this down. Now see, this is, I have not heard any music from this, so I don't know if this piano line is typically found in this arrangement, or if they've taken each individual note and created this arrangement out of it. Yeah, see, some of the other lines are a bit more choppier than that piano line, so I think that piano line is probably found in that pattern somewhere in the soundtrack. I absolutely love all the layering going on in here, though. The percussion specifically, really creating some nice texture layers by putting 2 or 3 sound effects going on at the same time. You guys can't remind me to talk about stuff. I was going to say remind me to talk about this. I'm going to write it down instead. Really great groove. wonder if the rigidness is sort of an implied element of the style. I will say, completely aside, there are a lot of cutscenes in this. In Breath of the Wild, I did not expect so many scripted animations to be going on in that video. Makes me think there's a lot of, like I said, cutscenes in the game, which is, I don't know. I haven't really played a lot of Zelda games. I think Ocarina of Time was the last one. Didn't really have a lot of cutscenes in it. Um, anyways, back on topic on the music though. So this is interesting. It's brought up a couple of questions that I have about the music. First of all, is the rigidness of the style, right? Because the sounds are all going to have different timbres and tones to them that even if they're making a melodic movement and a nice melodic flow based on what's on the paper, they're going to sound disjointed because none of the tones are similar. Now, we could probably smooth this over a little bit. What if we take one tone and modulate it, like what we saw with the Alice track? That's going to help a little bit. Another thing that I noticed that helps with, or kind of pulls in this choppy feeling, is that sounds tend to stop when the next starts. Having a little trail off would also kind of help the flow as well, especially with the more melodic lines. You can hear in the piano, and why I thought that the piano is an isolated concept that you can find in the song rather than a series of notes that are taken out of context, is because they tend to reverberate under each other. They all feel connected in that way, where when we look at other melodic lines, each note feels wholly disjointed from the ones around it, what come prior and after it. And like I said, this can be fixed if you want to continue to utilize different tones on each note and actually find a specific sound effect without having to modulate it too much. I think you can still help smooth everything over if you wanted to. I mean, it's 2022. We have a lot of musical editing tools out there for, not necessarily, I would say, for this specifically, but that can be utilized in this case. I'm not saying that it has to be done, but I am questioning if the tools are out there and people aren't using them, is that because it's an intrinsic aspect of the style? To bring it into metal terms for the majority of rock and metal people in the audience, just because we can make cleanly produced high fidelity music doesn't mean that black metal needs to do that, because it's intrinsic for lo-fi black metal to be low fidelity, to not be clean, to be muddy. The options, software wise, recording wise, the whole process of getting it from instrument to an MP3 file, there are ways to do it cleanly. They are purposefully excluding them because it doesn't fit their vision. It doesn't fit the style of music they want to make. And I'm curious if that's what's happening here, and that the rigidity of the melodies is intrinsic to the sound of plunderphonics. And there might even be a branch of smooth plunderphonics where they utilize tools to reduce the choppiness of melody lines and stuff like that. But 2 tracks in, I'm trying not to make any broad strokes here, and really try to say what plunderphonics is, only having heard 2 tracks now and have a cursory understanding of what it is and where its origins stem from. But in this limited experience I have, I am hearing that connection. I'm real curious what the next track is going to bring, being that it's an older work from this producer here, liltommyj. So that's really interesting. is that, 2007, maybe we didn't have the tools back then. I don't know how early audio workstation software was. I don't know what kind of effects and plugins we had at the time. I've only just recently got into it. 2007, I was still working with Sibelius, music notation software. I was not, I was not even thinking about using audio workstations. It's not what I wanted to do. The performance side and the production side, the engineering side were for somebody else. I was writing music. Um, solely writing music, pen on paper or notation software, who would play it and how that would get recorded and how that would be engineered and mastered. That was not my problem. I was not wanting to be a do it all, jack of all trades person. I am now because that's kind of where things are at. So many, one person bedroom artists out there. I kind of have to pick up those tool sets now, but yeah, then I wasn't. So I don't know what things were like back then. But 2018 certainly. I know the tools are out there now, um, but I also know that some of them can be a bit more expensive if you don't want to do it yourself. If you kind of want to automate it a little bit, in which case maybe Plunderphonics can also be seen as more of a grassroots movement idea. Because even right here, while I did mention previously that there's a lot of skill and time and really ear training to finding your sounds in a work of in a previous work, especially something like this. Like Alice is a contained experience, right? If you want a specific sound, it's always going to be at 32 minutes and 16 seconds in, just to give a random number. But with a video game, first of all, there's a lot of sounds in it. Sometimes there's sounds you aren't going to hear because of the interactive nature of it. And if it's a sound that you've heard, you have to figure out what created it and how to reproduce it. You don't just rewind to when you heard it. You've got to unless you're recording everything you play. I mean, that's definitely going to help as well. That way you don't have to try to reproduce anything. But actually, that's a really smart way to do that. Record your playing so that you can have uh, a fixed process to go back and check out. Yeah, yeah, that's probably what happened. That's a lot easier than trying to reproduce it and capturing these 30-second clips of reproduced sounds. Even though I think that would be easier to search through because you can have like file names, right? This is the shield clank sound. I don't know. I'm curious if people use one way or the other more often. Just record everything and cut out what you need after you reanalyze it, or maybe make notes as you're playing. I played for 48 minutes in, and this is the sound I heard. Go back and find it in the video thing. Or if they try to reproduce sounds and just capture the reproduction. I don't know. Getting way off topic, but I think I'm on topic because I think that's what I'm going to do with this video is just kind of have it be a bit more open-ended. There's a lot of really cool topics that are coming out of this discussion here that don't necessarily have to do with the music, but have to do with the music, if that makes sense. Not this specific song, but just music at large. One other thing I want to talk about, though, is I kind of said that this could be a sort of grassroots movement where it's mostly comprised of choppier ideas that are formed in weaker software or maybe with less effects because most effects cost money, especially if you want to look at automated things as well. In which case, we can kind of extrapolate that a little bit and take this a hair bit further and say that this is also a bit of a grassroots movement for sound creation. I had mentioned that with people who make their music from scratch, you have to have a synthesizer to provide you the sound waves for you to modulate on. And I'm pretty sure there's some cheap or free uh, things out there that'll help you get started with this. Um, I think Vital. I think Vital is actually a free plugin that can set you up with some of this stuff. I don't know how wide of an option, how wide, how many options you can have with the free version. I don't know if there's paid version. I've used Vital a few times, but not to make things because, like I said, it's kind of daunting. But there are some baked-in ones, and I found some presets on the internet that I can just pop in and utilize. But I'm pretty sure that's a free VST. But once you start getting into bigger ideas, you got to start spending money. Well, here, there's nothing to spend. All you need is a source material. You need somebody else's work. This is a bit of an appropriation thing that also ties into trademark. I wonder if any of this has ever been had a copyright strike against it or anything like that because they're utilizing works that are not theirs. Um, I mean, when we look at Pogo, at least specifically Pogo, every sound in there, the vocal work that happened in there is the works of Disney. Um, and anybody that they paid to make the sounds or the music or uh, possibly the voice actors for Alice, all of that. Pogo owns nothing of that. And Disney's pretty good at taking things down. So, I wonder if anything like that has happened. On the flip side, though, this is, in my eyes, fair use. Everything being created is utilizing sounds that belong to somebody else, but the end result is wholly distinct from anything that the original creators were intending to create. It is a brand new work made out of somebody else's sounds. Where is the line drawn on that? Like I said, to me, this is clearly fair use. But has anything legal been done about this? Is this a gray area thing where technically it's free use, but also sometimes people have done DMCA takedowns on it and no one's ever been to court to lay down precedent? At least in the US. Of course, every country has different trademark and copyright laws. So this could be more or less legal in different areas of the world. It's I don't know. It's interesting because like in the US at least trademark law has kind of gotten out of hand. At least in my view. This is my opinion. I'm not trying to say that I'm right or anything. This is how I view it. But a lot of things probably should have hit the public domain already, but haven't because of lobbying or loopholes or anything like that. And this kind of feels like, especially when we look at older stuff like the Alice in Wonderland from Pogo, more so than this one from Breath of the Wild, of a work that should have hit public domain already and is a way to sort of kind of take that control back. Again, grassroots movement for people who are less financially set up and trying to find ways to do things that should be closer to public use, free for public use. And I don't know, is that kind of where some of this came from? Is that kind of where it's evolved to? I don't know. It's bringing up a lot of questions for me though. As far as what music is, who has a right to make music, what does fair use actually entail, um, and all of this. Now, something else I want to bring up here specifically in this Open Your Eyes track is once again, it's very, at least in my ears, firmly rooted in pop electronic music. The rhythm is very groovy and catchy. It has a simple syncopation that you can hear in a lot of electronic or a lot of pop music. I don't want to say electronic, a lot of pop music. Um, and the melody line that's utilized occasionally in instruments, occasionally in some of the voices, the vocal work is very catchy, very palatable. Again, it's a very palatable track. If this was done without polyphonics, with original sounds, or with just generic techno sounds, I don't think anything about it would really stand out to me. It really is the process that went into it, and thus the character that exudes from that process, the choppiness of it, and the ingenuity that stems from that, that is really the most interesting aspect of it. The final thing I want to talk about here before we move on to our final track is hocketing, which I think that this style of music would really benefit from, but I don't think I've heard much of yet, other than the final four notes in that second melody line from Alice. Hocketing, for those who don't know, is when two different instruments, two different voices, or three or four or five, however many you want, take turns playing notes in a melody line. So if you have do 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 do, imagine that you just roll a die, a three-sided die. And if it says two, your first instrument gets the first two notes. And you roll it again, you get one. Well, now your second instrument gets one note. And then you roll it again and you get another one. Well, your third instrument gets the next note and you roll it to three. We go back to our first instrument and they get the next three notes. So you get do 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 dee 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 dee. This kind of like back and forth where the melody is jumping between all these instruments. Maybe spatially if you have them in different places in your mix, but more importantly, sonically. Maybe you have a saxophone and an electric guitar and a vocal choir, so they're all going to sound different and your melody is going to sound like it's jumping around. That's kind of what's happening here, except we don't have any sense of fluidity. Um, in that we don't tend to repeat sounds. And again, we're looking at two whole songs. It's very possible that hocketing is a very large part of the plunderphonics style. I just haven't heard it yet. But this seems like a style of music that is ripe for hocketing, in which case we would want to bounce back and forth between as small amount of instruments as possible in order to improve cohesion despite the choppiness of the melodic performance due to bouncing around between different notes or different instruments. And I started to hear a little element of it here, which kind of sparked this in my brain, but never really landed on a moment of um, what I would call positive Hocket, because technically this is a Hocket. We have melody lines being played by several instruments where the idea gets passed between instruments at odd parts. It's not like somebody plays, the first lick and then there's a rest and then the next lick is played by another instrument. No, the melody is passed to different instruments in the middle of the idea. So technically, this is a Hocket, but I don't think it works. In that I mean, I don't think that the use of the Hocket has a positive effect on the song, except that it gives it a unique characteristic. Usually I would use a Hocket in a way that helps elevate a section. Maybe you have two panned instruments. Maybe you have two similarly styles of instruments. Maybe you have three instruments that are supposed to feel like they're working together. Maybe you have three vocalists who continue, the one person says two words and then two words and then two words, and you can tell that they're all in unison. These three people are all in sync, and it helps tell the story of their relationship as characters in the song or the musical or whatever. I always see a thematic angle to it. And to me, that helps legitimize. I don't like that, but it helps legitimize the purpose of the Hocket. Here, the Hocket is a byproduct. It is something that comes about because they are utilizing different tones for every note, because, at least in this case, it sounds like they don't want to modify, they don't want to pitch correct or pitch change any of them. Everything is being used wholesale. So if they want to have a melody, they have to find a different sound for each note. And so the Hocket is a byproduct of their decision. They didn't want to make a Hocket, it just happened to appear in here. And through that, the Hocket feels a bit weak. It's not an intentional aspect of the song, at least. But I do think that having the intentionality of Hocketing mixed in with this idea of having so many different timbres in melody lines can really be used to elevate some of this stuff and bring some cohesion together in this style of music, because the two tracks I've heard so far kind of lack that cohesion, at least on the melodic line. The songs as a whole do feel complete and wholly connected, but when we look at isolated melodic movements, it feels very disjointed from each other. All the notes feel like they should connect, and they do on paper, but sonically they're all so different from each other. And I think having a Hocket and allowing these instruments to kind of cycle through their tones rather than just continuing to move on to new timbres, it could help increase some of it. But I'm also saying that as an outsider to the movement, to the genre. It could very well be, again, that the disjointedness is a strong component of it. And maybe what I'm talking about is an offshoot, a subgenre of polyphonics where they do try to achieve a more fluid or cohesive feel. So, with that said, let's move on. Like I said, I'm really happy with where this is going. Not that I'm talking about anything in particular, but that I'm bringing up a lot of these larger ideas. This is Stereo Reservoir's last polyphonic request. This is for the 2015 Megamix by liltommyj. It's a piece of music created using only stems from his own previous works of plunderphonics from that year. Talk about getting meta. So, in this one, the creator had been creating several polyphonics tracks through the year and has decided to make a mix of tracks from those works from this year. Very interesting idea to go about. This one is just under 6 minutes, so a little bit longer than the other two we've checked out. I don't know if I'll have anything to add after this. I think I've pretty much talked about everything I want to talk about with this style of music. I don't think we're going to hear anything new here, though. I have been surprised by things before. So we may just listen to this and end the video, but we'll find out when we get there. All right. This is the 2015 Megamix by liltommyj. I really like that stop right there. It creates a little pause that works well against the melody. Ah, man, Tearaway. It's such a good game. Transistors. I'm getting some nostalgia here just from the game selection. I think it's interesting too that it looks like the sections of this Megamix are subjected to just 1 or 2. Oh, so we pushed it up to 4 now. Okay. There is some pitch modification going on in here that I don't think I heard in the Open Your Eyes one. I will say it's really neat to hear some of these melodic lines also contribute rhythmic components to the song because of the way that they're sort of choppy and disjointed. I was trying to imagine what some of these would sound like if they were a bit smoother, and maybe they don't work as well. Maybe they would take a little bit of tweaking, because I think the melodic lines are created with the rigidness in mind. It's not something we could just straight copy into something a bit smoother. See, it's interesting in this part that this is our melody line, but it's also kind of fading into just the music. think it's interesting that as often as we're switching between what I'm going to call sample packs, right? As we're switching between games where our sounds can come from, there's still a cohesion to the whole track. You know, it's interesting too. This just clicked with me with that final bit of movement right there. I've heard this very disjointed vocal work before, where the vocals are, I think they are. So they're vocal samples, right? They're words, they're speech, their language, but because of the way that they're being modified, it's kind of gives a different, at least to me, a perception about them. They don't sound like speech anymore, and they begin to just sound like syllabic notes. And I've heard this before. Very quick, sharp collection of disjointed notes with syllables tied to them. There is this huge thing that happened last year in the indie game realm called Friday Night Funkin', which was basically Dance Dance Revolution, primarily designed to be played with arrow keys on a keyboard, not a dance mat, and a lot of the songs are comprised of this style of vocal work. And something about the last 45 seconds there with the vocal tracks, the way they were created, reminded me exactly of some of the sounds that came out of Friday Night Funkin' and the way that they crafted the vocal sound in those tracks, or in that game. Interesting connection. I'm curious if the people who created the music for that game were influenced at all by Plunderphonics, or if it is just a complete coincidence that the rhythmic structure and the way that the end result sounds is very similar when we look at the way that Plunderphonics crafts its vocal lines and Friday Night Funkin' chose to do theirs. Complete aside though, like has nothing to do with the song itself. Yeah, I think my big takeaway here though is just how cohesive the track felt. By the end, we were at, what was that, 11 different games that were being showcased. I think in the end, I don't know if the 11 panels they showed in that final scene were indicative of everything that was utilized throughout the song, but still, they found a way to take sound effects and voice lines and music notes from pieces of soundtracks in all of these games to create something that felt cohesive, despite all of the games themselves having different emotions and atmospheres and tones as far as looking at the audio side of each game. It's kind of fascinating to think about that, not to mention that not only did we take the ideas from each of the games, we took all of these ideas from individual other Plunderphonics songs. So we've actually mutated the ideas from the games twice now. Though I don't know if anything here. Well, now this asks another question though. There's obviously modification done on some of these sounds, maybe pitch wise, right? Maybe they got stretched, maybe they got warped, right? There's all sorts of things that can be modified to the sound. Obviously, there was probably some change to the sound from the game to the original track that was created from them. But this is a track created from 11 other tracks, I believe. And is there modification from those, or did they just take the sound samples that they had utilized there to build a new song? Is this made from the rest of the songs that were made in 2015, or are these made from the sounds that were used to build the other songs in 2015? I lack the context for that one. I don't think one is more impressive than the other, but I do think one of them allows us to say that we are now two steps removed from the original source material, which is an interesting conversation when we look at, again, who owns the sounds and do they have the right to uh, remove this from the internet based on ownership of the original sounds if they have been twice removed from the source material. Um, but yeah, I think that's going to be it for this. Like I said, I don't know that I have a lot to say about the music because a lot of it is just very palatable, poppy electro music that I think works well, especially on paper. It really is the execution of the music that's been written and the sounds that they choose to play this music with that gives these songs personality characteristic beyond what we would typically attribute to the music itself. And in that case, it's sort of like the performative aspect of music where you can have the notes on the paper, but how two different people perform them, even with the same instrument, can create two vastly different songs. Here, I can hear the music on the paper, but because of how they chose to play it, utilizing samples from other works, it crafts a song that's very different than I think what would be the sound on paper. Because of the constantly fluctuating tones and timbres and the way that notes and phrases are rounded off and phrased. There's just a lot of interesting elements to it. As a quick aside before we turn this off, I had mentioned Transistor in there. If you haven't listened to the Transistor soundtrack, even if you don't play video games, check it out. It's composed by Darren Korb, and it is just a wonderfully beautiful soundtrack, even without the context of the game itself. And it has vocals on it by Ashley Barnett. Let me look this up real quick because I don't want to misattribute or pronounce anyone's name wrong. But it is just a phenomenal. Um, Ashley Barrett. Sorry. So yeah, composed by Darren Korb with vocals by Ashley Barrett. I think Darren Korb does a couple vocals on it as well as. Oh no, maybe not. I don't. I can't remember. I don't think so though. Anyways, Ashley Barrett's featured on a lot of them as she voices the main protagonist when she sings, and a lot of the songs are about it. It is a game where the soundtrack is so very closely tied to the game itself, and Darren Korb just does a fantastic job marrying the two. And like I said, even in isolation, though, it's totally worth checking out. Please go do it. This soundtrack needs more ears on it. Um, so yeah, a little aside there. I had to plug that just because it's one of my favorite soundtracks ever. Those are my thoughts on kind of plunder phonics in general and things that it made me think about, but also specifically about Pogo's Alice and Little Tommy J's Open Your Eyes and their 2015 Megamix. This is where you guys come in. Let me know what you thought of this. Anything that stands out to you, anything you'd like to add to the conversation, any direction you'd like to take the conversation in. I think this is probably one of the most open ended videos in that it feels not so much about me talking to you about what's happening in here as much as just me opening up my thoughts while listening to this and commentating on where these tracks took me rather than analyzing what happened within them. I'm kind of hoping to see some strong or just good conversation come about because I think there's some interesting things to talk about here. But, if you have nothing, don't comment, I suppose. If you want to comment just for the algorithm, that's fine too. I don't care. Do what you want, man. It's your life, right? If you just want to put a comment with random letters, you want to put a comment with Z, I'll take it. And if you don't want to comment at all, that is fine as well. Above the comment section is a description box. In there is a link for Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. Has links to everything related to the menu. You can pick up some merch, follow me on Twitter, support the channel through Patreon, submit your own special selection if you'd like to get your song on the channel. Email me, join the Discord server. There's a lot of stuff in there. Go ahead and check it out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow. We are finally back on schedule. Releases at 5 p.m. and 5:30 p.m. EST, 9 and 9:30 p.m. UTC. We are getting back on track with our theme, Blank of the Blank. We're going to be looking at our last 4 tracks for that and checking out more special selections throughout the week as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.